Welcome to the Shutter. I got two great Bigfoot stories here for you, and a real treat and surprise on the second one, so make sure you stick around for that. So, get yourself all comfy, kick back, and I hope you enjoy. I would like to make a report of two encounters that happened to my uncle and I. They took place in 1970 and 71. We were 16 years old at the time. Both happened within a few miles of each other, northeast of the town of Cavello in Mendocino County, California. My grandparents and my uncle lived in Cavello at the time, and I would spend my summers there. My uncle and I were very close in age, just 5 months apart, so we were more like brothers growing up. The first incident, my grandfather dropped my uncle and myself at Howard Lake for a 3-day, 2-night camping trip. We only brought our sleeping bags, fishing poles, and a Sheridan pump pellet gun. We had about a dozen apples, a few oranges, and we would supplement with fish and small game, birds, etc. The first day we caught fish for dinner, and nothing of note happened. The second day, we decided to hike down the mountain to the Eel River to fish and explore. After a while at the river, we got a little bored, and I found a piece of driftwood shaped very much like a baseball bat. So being kids, we started a simulated baseball game, where one of us would pitch small rocks from the gravel bar that we were on, and the other would smack it with the bat. We did this for a while, when all of a sudden, a rock about fist size came flying down from the hillside behind me and landed between us. We were very startled, to say the least. We yelled at whoever had done this to knock it off. Due to heavy brush and trees, we couldn't see anyone. My uncle thought it might be some of his buddies from town that followed us up there, but still saw no one. We moved closer to the river and continued our impromptu game when another rock about the same size crashed between us again. We started to get pretty freaked out by this time. We yelled that we were armed and dangerous and to show themselves. When nothing happened further, we grabbed our stuff and hiked back to our camp. We had to go up from where the rocks had been thrown. My uncle carried the pellet gun, and I carried my bat. Tough guys, I know. Anyway, we made it back to camp to discover that someone had gone through our camp, unrolling sleeping bags and scattering everything all around. We had our fruit in a small pack that we hung in a tree, about 10 feet high. There are bears in the area. The zipper of the pack was opened, and our fruit was gone. Nothing else was missing, just thrown about. We grabbed all of our stuff and made a beeline for the road back to town. We were not going to stay there any longer. Luckily for us, a family and a camper came by right away and gave us a ride back to town. When we told my grandpa what had happened, as he was curious as to why we were back a day early, all he said was, "Damn hippies." We got a chuckle out of that. We didn't know who or what had messed with us, but we knew it wasn't hippies. The second incident left no doubt what was in those same hills. The next summer, my uncle had his driver license, so we went up farther than Howard Lake to a place near Hammerhorn Lake. There was a stream that my uncle knew of that had a population of native brook trout that he wanted to show me. He had been there before, as he lived in Cavello, and he was a great outdoorsman and explorer at 17. He was fearless at that age. We arrived and started fishing upstream. We were in stealth mode, as this was a small creek, and the trout would spook at any loud noise or fast movement. We went for a while, doing well, catching and releasing many fish, as they were kind of small, but we were having a lot of fun. We came to a large slab of granite that rose up at an angle about 20 feet or so. My uncle started up it, so I followed right behind him. When we got to the top, we heard a loud scream from right below us. My uncle stepped back right into me as the scream startled the both of us. Almost immediately, we saw an animal take off from below us across an open sandbar. It was on all fours. It took 4 leaps, and it made a noise on every leap that sounded like hoof or woof. This happened so very fast that we stood there in shock watching. When it made its 4th leap, in almost the same instant, it stopped, turned around, and stood on 2 legs, staring back at us. It was about 20 yards away. It stood for maybe 5 seconds, then made a huff noise, turned, and walked away on 2 legs. It only took a few seconds to disappear in the brush. We just turned and started leaving post-haste. I remember one of us or both of us saying, "What the hell was that?" We were in shock. I got a real good look at it, and it was not anything I'd ever seen before. It was dark brown to black in color. It had hair, not fur. It stood semi-crouched with long arms that were kind of outstretched forward and slightly to its side. It had no hair on its face or its fingers. Its skin was dark gray. Its eyes were dark brown with no whites that I could see. It had a flat nose with the nostrils pointed down. I think this animal was about 6.5 feet tall. My uncle was 6'3" at the time, and the creature was slightly taller. It had broad shoulders that tapered down to the waist. I would estimate the weight to be about 250 pounds. I think it was laying down below the granite slab that we were on, and we surprised it. That's why it just took off on all fours. We didn't see it until it was moving, and man, was it moving. The look on its face was one of shock or surprise, almost like it couldn't believe that we had gotten so close to it. We had decided not to tell anyone about this, so as to not be ridiculed. We didn't think anyone would believe us anyway. We talked about this a few times and started hearing and learning more about the creature, to the point that we had no doubt that what we saw was a Bigfoot. This next account is from two men from North Alabama. I said I had a treat and a surprise for you, so I hope you enjoy.
My name is Carl. I live in North Alabama, and up until about 5 years ago, I hunted quite often. When I say often, I mean it was my religion. I went to church, and I still do, but I spent way more time hunting than I did worshiping. I'd hunt with my cousin James most of the time. We had a lease on 450 acres that we kept for 17 years. We made it a trophy buck lease, and people begged us to take them hunting there. We camped out there most weekends during the season, and sometimes just to get away from the house when the season wasn't in. These weekends were often interrupted by strange things. I heard tell of some experiences, and a lot of what they described happened to us quite often. I never heard a scream, but I heard knocks. Some at night while walking out, and animals that just didn't sound right, especially owls. On this particular morning, we had gotten into the woods late. The sun was already coming up. James and I usually walked in together, and then we split up when we got close to our stands. He'd go one way and I'd go the other. We had walked about 200 yards in on the main trail when I dropped my .30-06 shells. I cussed, of course, and I told James to go ahead to his stand, it being late and all, and off he walked while I picked up my shells. I think he got about 70 yards ahead of me. There was a sharp bend in the trail which was bordered by a thicket of small pines and led through to my favorite stand on the edge of a big swamp. I rounded the bend. I could see James just standing there about 50 yards ahead. He was facing the swamp to the right. I didn't want to yell, so I kept heading towards him. I figured he'd signal if he needed me to stop because he was definitely looking at something. He was standing profile to me when suddenly he raised his right arm toward me, not all the way, just about 12 inches off his thigh, and started waving his hand up and down. I took it as him wanting me to stop, so I did. When he noticed I'd stopped, he did the same, but this time much faster. I knew then he wanted me to come on. When I got to within 20 feet or so, I looked to my right to try and see what he was seeing. I was moving slowly towards him when I saw this thing. All I could make out at first was a tall, real large black figure. James was shaking his hand uncontrollably, so I sped up. And then I came to an abrupt stop when I saw it clearly. There was no doubt about it. This was a Sasquatch. It was standing halfway behind a cypress tree in about 2 feet of water, all black except the skin underneath its hair was dark gray. The hair was sparse in places on its body, but the arms and shoulders were thick. The face looked like a man's face with exaggerated features. The nose was really wide, and there was no hair on its face. It was looking at James at first, but once I came into view, it turned its head towards me. It would take turns looking back and forth at both of us, slowly turning its head in each direction. I guess we were far enough apart that it couldn't just move its eyes.
When Carl dropped his shells, I carried on down the trail. I was going to hunt the stand by the swamp and let him head on down to mine another 400 yards past his. When I got around that bend and on up where the thicket started clearing, I caught this thing out of the corner of my eye, and when I turned to look, I just froze in place. It was standing about 50 feet over in the swamp from me. My rifle was loaded, but I didn't want to move. We stared at each other for a good 10 seconds. It looked mad as hell. I tried to call out for Carl. I took a breath to call, and as I made that motion, it showed me its teeth. Something about seeing that made me unable to yell or even speak. It stopped snarling, so I tried again. Same thing. Breathe in, and he shows his teeth. Same effect. I don't think I could have even spoke without having nothing but air come out. I was absolutely petrified. When I heard Carl round the bend, I was just able to raise my hand and try to get his attention by waving at him. When he stopped about 20 feet from me, I knew he was seeing what I was seeing. Like he said, the Bigfoot was looking back and forth at both of us, but it didn't show his teeth again. We was in a stalemate for at least 30 seconds when the first rock hit me in the backpack. I'm not sure how big it was, but it hit pretty hard. I knew it was coming from behind me, and I knew it wasn't Carl. Then another one whizzed past right between us. Then 3 or 4 at one time came hurling by. Me and Carl looked at each other and both took off back toward the truck fast as we could get there. Whoever or whatever was throwing rocks, there was more than one. As we was running to the truck, I could hear rocks bouncing off trees and strafing through the thicket. A 2-foot limb landed about 10 feet in front of us. It was just a barrage of rocks and green pine cones hitting all around us. I turned and fired 2 rounds back behind me while I was still on the move. We got to the truck, we threw our packs in the back, and hauled butt out of there. We didn't say anything to each other on the way home. Carl dropped me off and said he'd call me later.
After I dropped James at his house, I drove home in a daze. I had decided before I got there that I wasn't going to hunt anymore. I subleased the property now for a small profit, of course. James won't go back either, but he will do a canned hunt at a deer farm in Texas just to get some meat every year. Me, I'm done with it. I sold all but my rifle, and I kept that just for protection. There's no doubt we ran into Bigfoot that day. Those creatures, whatever they are, they're real. It is the one thing that I'll never have to wonder about ever again.
Well, there you go. Surprise. We added the North Alabama accents for effect. I do want to thank my good friend Cam Buckner from the YouTube channel Dixie Cryptid for helping me out on this one. I hope y'all enjoyed it. If you did, give it a thumbs up and share. I know y'all won't hold back on the comments. Once again, thank you for listening, and I hope to see you back here next time for The Shutter.